what's happening here, kiddos, that leads up to this, is Robert Kennedy's on the campaign trail. As we mentioned yesterday, on March 16th of 1968, he made the announcement publicly that he too would seek the Democratic nomination for president. So he's on the campaign trail. And there's a couple of things he's campaigning on. Number one, obviously, is what? Opposition to the Vietnam War. Okay, he's going to campaign on ending the war in Vietnam. But he also is campaigning on behalf of poor people and minorities. He really believes the poor people and minorities in this country are not getting a fair shake, and so he is really campaigning on helping the poor, helping minorities, and ending the Vietnam War. Now, he had always been an advocate for withdrawing from Vietnam. He could see no victory in sight. And I think his plan, if elected president, was to gradually withdraw troops from Vietnam. Because you can't, it's like if you're hooked on caffeine, you just can't quit. You just can't quit cold turkey. You get headaches and all kinds of side effects. You can't just pull every troop out of Vietnam. That doesn't work. You just can't leave the South Vietnamese in a lurch. So his plan was to slowly withdraw troops out of Vietnam until we finally could turn the country back over to South Vietnam, and they'd have to deal with it themselves because it wasn't working very well with American involvement. That was his thought process. So, in early June of 1968, he's on the campaign trail, and there's two specific states that he has already targeted and another state he was heading to. He already had won primary victories in South Dakota, and he had just, at the moment we're talking about, won a primary victory in California. And his next place of campaign would be in Illinois. So the idea, again, behind these primaries is you run in these primaries, and if you win these primaries, your chances of getting the Democratic nomination for president at the National Convention is very good. And Kennedy believes strongly that if he can win California and Illinois, that it'll pave his way for the nomination. So he wins by June 2nd, or excuse me, by June 4th, he has won primaries in both South Dakota and California. And actually, he's in Los Angeles, California. And he's about to give his victory speech at the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. So he's already won in South Dakota. He's traveled to California. He's found out that he's won the California primary, and now he's going to stand up in front of a crowd of supporters and give a victory speech in the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel. And it's about 12:15 in the morning on June 5th, 1968. So it's barely into the new day. June 5th, 1968, at 12:15 in the morning, Kennedy steps up to the podium at the ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel, and he's going to give a victory speech. Yes? And 12 in the morning. Yep, 12:15 a.m. So what happened is, when did he really win the primary in California? On the 4th. Okay, the returns came in late on the 4th. It's 12:15 a.m. in the morning on the 5th. He's finally convinced he's won the primary, and he's going to give a victory speech in the ballroom. Okay? Well, he does. He gives a short speech, which I'll show you Monday, and his last statements are, "Thank you very much. It's on to Chicago," and let's win there. And he gives the victory sign, peace sign, so to speak, and he leaves the podium. Okay? And the plan is to take him to the kitchen area because it's closer to get out of the hotel, and he kind of wants to avoid the media and all the people that are there. He wants kind of a nice, easy move out of the hotel into his waiting car and going to wherever he's going. So he gives his last remarks. It's on to Chicago, and let's win there. And he and his entourage exit the hotel through the kitchen area. And again, this route was scheduled because it would be a faster way to exit the hotel to avoid the media barrage that was going to soon follow. Well, when he gets in the kitchen area, there's a lot of workers there. There's cooks, there's different people. What type of people are these people working there? Minorities and poor people. And so he stops and shakes hands and mills around for a little bit. And then he begins to exit the kitchen area. And as he began to exit the kitchen area, a young man stepped in front of Kennedy and shouted, "Kennedy, you son of a bitch." Pointed his 8-shot 22 caliber revolver and emptied the pistol, so to speak, in the general area of Kennedy and his entourage. Okay? So as he begins to leave the kitchen area, a young man steps out and yells, "Kennedy, you son of a bitch," pulls out an 8-shot 22 caliber revolver and begins to fire into Kennedy and his entourage. Now, if you don't know anything about guns, a 22 caliber shell is very small. It's not like a 38 or, you know, a Mannlicher Carcano 6.5. It's not a hunting rifle. It's kind of a wimpier weapon, so to speak. Okay, it's not a killer. It's not a weapon you would use if you, I guess, wanted to really do damage. But anyway, that's what he does. He fires an 8-shot 22 caliber several times towards Kennedy and his entourage. The man that fired the shots was immediately apprehended by 3 Kennedy supporters that were part of his entourage. A journalist by the name of George Plimpton, it's okay. So he is immediately apprehended after the shooting, the assailant, by 3 of Kennedy's entourage, his supporters. First was journalist George Plimpton. Second was Olympic gold medal decathlete Rafer Johnson. Gold medal decathlete Rafer Johnson. And a Los Angeles Rams professional football player by the name of Rosie Greer. So the assailant was apprehended immediately by 3 of Kennedy's entourage, journalist George Plimpton, Olympic gold medal decathlete Rafer Johnson, and professional football player, Los Angeles Rams player, Rosie Greer. Matter of fact, when you see the video when Kennedy says, "Now it's on to Chicago, let's win there," you will see Rosie Greer standing right behind him. Okay?
What was Rosie?
He was a professional football player for the Los Angeles Rams. Now, nobody had a video of the shooting. Nobody had a video of the shooting, but a reporter by the name of Andrew West had an audio recording of it and the aftermath. So they did not have a video recording of the shooting, but Andrew West, who was a reporter, did have an audio recording of the shooting and aftermath. Now you can picture this young man pointing his pistol and firing in the direction of Kennedy and his entourage at pretty close range. Well, Kennedy was shot twice in the back, which would not have been too bad, but the third shot hit him right behind the back of the right ear. So he was shot twice in the back and behind the right ear. And that shot, according to reports, was at pretty close range. So Senator Kennedy was shot twice in the back and once right behind his right ear. According to witnesses there, as he was laying on the floor bleeding, the first words out of his mouth were, "Is everybody else all right?" Because he realized he had a lot of people behind him. A lot of people don't know this. There were 5 other people wounded in this shooting. 5 other people were wounded in this shooting. 5. I'll give you their names a little bit, just a tad about it. One man wounded was Paul Schrade. Paul Schrade. He was 43 years old. He was a member of the United Auto Workers Union. He was simply there supporting Senator Kennedy in this campaign. Paul Schrade, 43 years old, member of the United Auto Workers Union, was simply there as a Kennedy supporter. Simply there as a Kennedy supporter, Paul Schrade. He was wounded in this attack. Another person wounded in this attack was Elizabeth Evans. She was 43 years old as well, simply a Democratic Party activist, someone there supporting Senator Kennedy's bid for the presidency. Elizabeth Evans, 43, a Democratic Party activist. Another person that was wounded in the Kennedy shooting was Ira Goldstein. He was just 19. He was a local radio reporter. Ira Goldstein. Just 19 years old. A local radio reporter. Next one was Erwin Stroll. He was just 17, and he was just simply a Kennedy campaign volunteer. He was just there, the guy, handing out the buttons, handing out the bumper stickers, that type of thing. Just 17 years old. And the final person shot was William Wessel. And that's kind of a little bit of a story behind William Wessel. He was 30 years old. He was a correspondent for CBS News. As he's lying on the floor wounded, he is corresponding back to New York City and telling them what's happening there. So he actually is wounded lying on the floor, and he is corresponding back to the main office in New York City telling them what's happening at the time.
34, right?
What's that?
34.
He was 30.
30.
Yeah, he's 30. But he was a news reporter. I said it CBS, it actually was ABC. He was a news reporter for ABC, and he was reporting back to ABC News in New York as he's lying there wounded. So it was kind of a quick bang, 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 and people down. Well, Kennedy was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, where he went under immediate emergency surgery. Okay? So Robert Kennedy was rushed to Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles, where he immediately underwent emergency surgery. Now, what day is this? 5th. Okay, so he goes in there early in the morning, right? 12:15 a.m. is when he gave the speech. Well, by 5 p.m. that night, Robert Kennedy's press secretary, Frank Mankiewicz, makes the decision that he's going to tell the American public the condition of Robert Kennedy. People wanted to know. I can remember my dad coming into my bedroom. I was 10 years old, just about to turn 11. And he said, "Hey, Senator Kennedy's been shot." And I'll never forget as long as I live. I remember that when you're that age. Never forget it. And so we waited all day because television was different in those days. We had rabbit ears and a TV that you watch football, you couldn't even see the ball being passed. Anyway, but my dad was glued to that TV, and so was my mom the whole day trying to figure out what was going to happen with Robert Kennedy. Well, finally at 5 o'clock that night, Frank Mankiewicz announces Kennedy's condition as, quote, extremely critical as to life. That's what he said. He described Kennedy's condition as extremely critical as to life. So what he's telling the American people is he's not deceased, but the doctors are much more concerned about survival than recovery. What does that tell you? What's he going to be like if he survives? Probably not going to be running for president. You know what I'm saying? So the political part of it's over, right? It's totally over. But they're trying to save his life. Well, by 11 o'clock that same night of June 5th, doctors made it clear that the senator was dying and would not survive. It was going to be just a matter of time. So by 11 p.m. that evening, doctors made it clear that survival was not going to be an option. He was dying, and it would be a matter of time. Very, very early in the morning on June 6th, again, just barely past, after midnight, Father Thomas Picha was summoned to Good Samaritan Hospital to administer the last rites of the Catholic Church to Senator Kennedy. So early in the morning of June 6th, Father Thomas Picha was summoned to administer the last rites of the Catholic Church to Senator Kennedy. Finally, at 1:59 a.m. on June 6th, 1:59 a.m. on June 6th, Robert Kennedy's press secretary, Frank Mankiewicz, stated the following. At 1:59 p.m. on June 6, 1968, Robert Kennedy's press secretary, Frank Mankiewicz, states the following. Just listen to it, and you can write down the important parts. This is what he said. Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968. Senator Robert Francis Kennedy died at 1:44 a.m. today, June 6, 1968. He further went on to say, with Senator Kennedy at the time of his death were his wife Ethel, his sisters Mrs. Stephen Smith and Patricia Lawford, brother-in-law Stephen Smith, and Mrs. John F. Kennedy. He was 42 years old. That was his statement. He was very upset later because he was emotional during the time. He was really feeling bad, and he ended up apologizing to the media because he omitted the fact that Senator Edward Kennedy was also there with his brother when he died. And he felt badly about that. But Edward Kennedy did not take offense because it was an emotional time. But in that statement I read to you, he did actually omit Senator Edward Kennedy from the list of those that were with Bobby when he died. So just so you know, Edward Kennedy was there. After his death, Kennedy's body was taken for autopsy. Unlike his brother, it was done in Los Angeles, like it was, supposed to be, so to speak. After the autopsy was over, they loaded his body on an airplane that was provided by the White House, and his body was taken back to New York City, where he was living, because remember, he was serving as a senator from that state. So after the autopsy, the White House provided an airplane. Robert Kennedy's body was taken back to New York City, and then would be taken to St. Patrick's Cathedral for the funeral mass. You've been there.
By Rockefeller Center. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's not as beautiful. You have to tell me if you think St. Patrick's or St. Matthew's is. St. Patrick's is beautiful on the outside. I've been inside, but I think St. Matthew's is cooler inside, but not as beautiful outside.
I'll show you the pictures.
Yeah, but he was taken to St. Patrick's Cathedral for the funeral mass. On June 8th, 1968, Senator Kennedy's funeral mass was conducted at St. Patrick's Cathedral. On June 8th, 1968, Senator Kennedy's funeral mass was conducted at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And the man that was chosen to give the eulogy, this would be the first of many that he will give, unfortunately, in years to come, for the Kennedy family, was Senator Edward Kennedy. He gave the eulogy for his brother Bobby. And unfortunately, he's going to give eulogies for two of Bobby's children. He's going to give a eulogy for John F. Kennedy Jr. He's going to give a eulogy for Jackie Kennedy. I mean, he's going to give a lot of eulogies in his life. This is the first one. This is one probably most remembered. And I'm going to read it to you because I think it's an incredible time. An incredible eulogy. And what was that Joe Kennedy's creed with his children? Kennedys don't cry. Now, Edward Kennedy did not cry, but you'll see it on video. His voice certainly crackles at times, which is really unusual. Kind of showed the emotion of it. This is what he said in his eulogy. He said, you may have heard some of this before. He said, my brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death what he was in life. He should be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. Those of us who loved him and who take him to his rest today, pray that what he was to us and what he wished for others will someday come to pass for all the world. As he said many times in parts of this nation to those he touched and those who sought to touch him, some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not? Have you ever heard that quote before? Well, you'll see it in D.C. Well, after the funeral mass, this is just amazing. You'll see video of this. This was incredible. After the funeral mass, Senator Kennedy's body was loaded on a train. And that train transported his body from New York City to Washington, D.C. on the same day of the funeral, in which he would be buried in Arlington National Cemetery next to his brother. That was what was going to happen. The train was many hours late for burial because of the mass crowds along the train tracks. It was incredible. From New York City to Washington DC, there wasn't hardly a stretch of train track that didn't have people. And they were old people, and they were middle-aged people, and they were young teenagers, and they were elementary kids, and they were babies, and there were hippies, and there were soldiers, and there were, Negroes, and there were I mean, every possible person you can imagine. People saluting the train as it went by. And it caused the train, because they made more stops than they thought, to be several hours late. And it was not, kiddos, until 10 o'clock at night on June 8th of 1968 that Robert F. Kennedy was laid to rest some 30 yards from his brother. And you'll see both when you get there, obviously. 30 yards from his brother. 10 o'clock in the evening. What's amazing is you go to the John Kennedy gravesite, you see this eternal flame and this really nice put together, memorial for the president. When you go 30 yards to your left, you will see a single white cross, which Robert Kennedy wanted. That's what he wanted. And a very small, simple white marble headstone that says Robert Francis Kennedy, day was born, day died. So it's really pretty moving, pretty cool. And around the other side of it is a wall that has quotes that Robert Kennedy made during his political career. So you get a chance to see, it's pretty cool. Probably the saddest thing, and why maybe this is sadder than John Kennedy, other than the fact it was the second Kennedy assassination, is Robert F. Kennedy left his wife Ethel behind with 10 children and her pregnant. 10 children and a pregnant wife. And I'm going to list the children, and I don't want you to write them down, but I just want you to listen to the names. The first one, I've got to tell you a story personally.